The brilliant scientist Henry Pym first appeared in Tales to Astonish number 27 in 1962. Despite being mocked by his peers for his radical theories, Pym successfully developed a formula that could shrink objects to miniature size and then return them to normal. In an act of hubris, Pym decided to test the formula on himself, but the effects proved more dramatic than he had anticipated. Shrinking faster than expected, Henry Pym reduced to the size of an insect and was unable to reach the enlarging serum he had left on the windowsill. In a fit of blind panic, Pym stumbled outside where he caught the attention of a colony of ants. He attempted to hide in one of the ants' underground tunnels, but in his frightened state, he accidentally tumbled down into the anthill, landing in a chamber filled with honey. Fortunately, one ant seemed to want to help Pym and pulled him from his sticky fate. However, the rest of the colony was more aggressive, but with some quick thinking and some proficiency at judo, Pym was able to crawl out of his underground prison. The ants followed him, but he again saw the ant that had rescued him. Climbing atop the helpful ant, Pym was able to ride it up the wall of the building, where he was able to reach the enlarging serum he left on the window, returning himself to regular size. Thinking his discovery too dangerous, Hank Pym told his fellow scientists that he had failed and destroyed the remainder of the serum he had created. From that moment on, Hank Pym never knowingly stepped on an anthill. However, this would not be the end of Pym's story, and several months later, in Tales to Astonish number 35, we saw the return of the Ant-Man. Not only did Pym recreate his size-changing serums, he also became more interested in ants, studying them closely and developing a helmet which used electrical impulses to communicate with them. Shortly after, the US government tasked Pym and his colleagues with developing countermeasures to radiation poisoning. This caught the attention of the Russians, who sent spies to obtain the secret formulas they were working on. Pym, being the only one with knowledge of the complete formula, refused to talk, and so the spies locked him up in his room as they tied up his colleagues and began searching the lab. Fortunately, the room he was locked in contained his secret projects. Henry Pym donned his cybernetic helmet as well as a steel mesh suit made of unstable molecules and used his size-changing serum to once again shrink down to ant size. Using an elastic band to propel himself to the window, Pym escaped his lab and returned to the anthill, using his helmet to control the ants. One ant refused his commands and attacked, but this time, while Pym shrunk to the size of an ant, he retained the strength of his full-size self. Leading the ant colony back to his lab, Pym untied his captured allies and set his army of insects on the spies. The tiny bugs swarmed the Russians, clogging their weaponry with honey and biting their skin. Realizing they'd been freed, the American scientists took their opportunity to defeat the foreign agents, as Pym returned to his room to preserve his secret identity. In the months following this incident, Henry Pym continued to fight against evil under the guise of the Ant-Man, and became an established superhero. By sending ants all over the city, Pym was able to create an insect information network, alerting him when the Ant-Man was needed. When the signal was given, he would use a miniature catapult to launch himself to his destination, landing on a waiting pile of ants. Ant-Man continued as a solo act until Tales to Astonish number 44. There we learned that Pym was once married to a woman named Maria Travaya. Maria and her father were political prisoners in Hungary, but had escaped to the United States. After marrying Henry Pym, Maria thought it safe to return to Hungary for their honeymoon, but despite Maria taking Pym's name, the two newlyweds were discovered and attacked by communist spies. Maria was taken, but Pym made it back to the American embassy, where he learned that Maria's body had been found, with a note warning people against escaping from behind the Iron Curtain. Not only that, but back in America, Maria's father was also murdered by communist agents. Pym went out in search of his wife's killers, but ultimately failed and returned to the United States. Pym nearly spiraled into a mental breakdown, but Maria had advised him not to be lazy and to look to the hard-working ant for inspiration. From then on, Pym dedicated himself to using his scientific prowess to help mankind. This newfound work ethic and determination to fight back against evil set Henry Pym on the path to creating his size-reducing serum and becoming Ant-Man. After reminiscing about these events, Pym decided that it may be prudent to recruit a partner in crime fighting. While he didn't have anybody he could trust enough, he did begin researching new equipment by studying wasp cells. Several weeks later, Henry Pym was visited by another scientist, Dr. Vernon Van Dyne, and his daughter Janet. Something about Janet reminded Pym of his lost love Maria, although Janet was much younger, barely an adult in Pym's eyes. Vernon had come to request Pym's aid in an experiment using a gamma-ray beam to detect life on other planets. Pym was uninterested, however, as it was outside his areas of expertise, and of course he was secretly occupied with his wasp cell research. Vernon Van Dyne continued his experiments alone, using his machine to probe the stars. However, he accidentally made contact with something sinister. An evil, viscous being was able to slither down the gamma beam, reaching Earth. Speaking into Van Dyne's brain, the barely comprehensible monster declared itself a criminal from the planet Cosmos. To prevent others from following, the malleable monster murdered Vernon Van Dyne and destroyed his machine. When Janet Van Dyne discovered her father's corpse, she didn't know where to turn, and desiring answers, she contacted Hank Pym. At first, Pym didn't believe Janet's story, but when his ant spies confirmed Van Dyne's death, Pym transformed into Ant-Man and blasted off to Van Dyne's lab. Meeting with Janet and examining the crime scene, Ant-Man determined that something unearthly had occurred. Janet Van Dyne was determined to avenge her father's death, and so Ant-Man instructed her to call the FBI and explain what had happened to his contact, Lee Kearns, before returning to Pym's lab. On his way back, Pym learned from the ants that the mist left behind by the creature was composed of formic acid. Returning to full size, Pym met Janet back at his lab, and when she expressed her desire to fight against injustice, Hank Pym revealed his secret life as Ant-Man. Pym offered to give her similar powers to his, and Janet agreed, undergoing a process so that when she shrank down using his serums, she would grow antennae to control insects, much like his cybernetic helmet, and wings that would allow her to fly. Meanwhile, the creature from Cosmos began rampaging in the city. Shrinking down, Ant-Man and the Wasp took off on their first adventure together, with Janet already beginning to develop feelings for Pym. Pym did not initially reciprocate the feelings of the younger woman, but the Wasp was eager to prove herself. The creature began to draw her in, but fortunately Ant-Man was able to rescue his new partner in peril. Luckily, by getting so close, Ant-Man was able to confirm that the creature was indeed made up of formic acid, and so the pair returned to the lab. Pym prepared a makeshift weapon to battle the monster by loading a formic acid antidote into shotgun shells. Using the ants to carry the weapon, Ant-Man blasted the creature, destroying it. Ant-Man and the Wasp continued to fight against evil together, even joining other heroes to become founding members of the Avengers. Furthermore, while the two were together, Pym further developed his size-changing formula to not only shrink and become Ant-Man, but also to grow and become Giant Man. Janet also improved her Wasp powers, adding a compressed air blaster to her wrists to serve as a surrogate sting. In one adventure, Henry revealed his previous marriage to Janet after his former FBI contact, Lee Kearns, was held captive behind the Iron Curtain. Pym explained that his wife, Maria, was a Hungarian freedom fighter who was killed after returning to her home country. As such, Henry refused to allow Janet to accompany him on his mission to Europe. Fortunately, even alone, Ant-Man was able to rescue Lee Kearns and foil a Soviet plot to create an army of intelligent guerrillas. Ant-Man and the Wasp continued their adventures until they temporarily retired from the superhero life. However, the two continued to train their powers, and upon returning to the Avengers, the pair had gained the ability to change their size at will without the use of serums or capsules. In the decades that followed, Pym used several different costumes and identities, including Goliath, Yellow Jacket, and even briefly took over as the Wasp, after Janet was ostensibly killed during the climax of Secret Invasion. Fortunately, Janet escaped death by shrinking, but she blacked out and ended up dropping into the subatomic microverse. After some time, Janet was able to send a signal to the Avengers, who were able to travel to the microverse and bring the Wasp back to Earth. So that's the origin of Ant-Man and the Wasp. There is, however, always more to tell, so if you want to know about how Hank Pym created Ultron, or his mental breakdown as Yellow Jacket, let me know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe for more marvelous content. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to my Twitter and Patreon. So until next time, true believers, Excelsior!